This is the Just Breathe podcast, a leadership platform for first responders and leaders who carry the responsibility long after the radio goes quiet. I'm your host, Dr. Tracie Keesee. In public safety, we're trained to move fast, decide quickly, and to stay in control, often under pressure, at times when incomplete information and real consequences are at play. What we are rarely taught, especially I remember my academy times, is how to regulate ourselves in those moments, how to pause just enough to think clearly, lead ethically, as I say, and to stay human. Just Breathe is not necessarily about slowing down the mission. It's about strengthening judgment, presence, and leadership on the street, in the command staff meeting, and of course at home. Each week, we'll have an honest conversation about self-regulation, leadership and accountabilities, and the realities of providing public safety to a community that often is not welcoming. We will have this in grounded experience, evidence, and of course, respect for the job. So let's begin. Our conversation topic today is command presence is a nervous system skill. And we have two incredible guests today, and I'm always so lucky when I can grab folks to come on and have this conversation. Our first guest is Dr. Ellen Kirschman. She's a clinical psychologist who spent decades working directly with first responders and helping them understand how cumulative stress, trauma, and exposure and survival wiring shape decision-making, identity, and the longevity in the profession. She's an author of I Love a Cop, I Love a Firefighter, and Counseling, three foundational works that have helped normalize conversations about stress, family, the impact of that on career sustainability, and overall public safety. And I will say this before I introduce my next guest, that she has over 4 decades in the business, so she knows who we are. So we're not going to have a conversation where we cannot have that interruptions of clarity from her. My next guest, of course, is Chief Jack Cawley. He's a veteran police chief here in Castle Rock, Colorado, a leader who has navigated the realities of command under pressure, balancing accountability, culture, and the human cost of leadership in high-stress organizations. In 2018, Chief Cawley was presented with the New York Times bestselling author and motivational speaker Simon Sinek's Igniter of the Year Award, and we're all fans of Simon Sinek. Chief Cawley is an architect of the one-by-one policing philosophy, which promotes building safe and secure environments for officers and staff so they are better equipped to serve each person they encounter individually. Welcome to the both of you to the Just Breathe podcast. I want to start with having a conversation about the physiological state shaping what leaders can access in a moment. So, Dr. Kirschman, I want to start with you and do a little reality check. You've worked clinically with first responders, and as I mentioned before, across 40 decades in their various career stages. When the nervous system is exposed to repeated threat, without recovery, and what changes do you see most consistently in judgment, emotional regulation, and decision-making?
Well, I see a lot of changes. The first thing I want to say is I think you attributed a book to me that I didn't write.
Oh, let's be careful. Okay.
Yeah, please. Sorry. So the third book I wrote was called Counseling Cops, What Clinicians Need to Know, because we know how hard it is for first responders to reach out for help if they don't get the help that is culturally competent, meaning that the person understands the culture a first responder works in. It's not going to go well. As a matter of fact, it's going to go badly. All right, so back now to your question. Well, I have found chiefs hiding in their office because the stress is so great that they're afraid to walk around their buildings, because what they get sometimes from their staff and their officers is nothing but complaints. I mean, they can have spent the last 6 months playing bridge with people on the board of supervisors in order to get a budget allocation for another patrol car, and all they get is from their staff complaints about why the patrol car is white and not blue. Chiefs serve so many masters. A police officer, a first responder, serves the chief, basically, and the community ideologically. But a chief has got to report up, down, and sideways. They've just got so many masters, and sometimes the stress gets unbearable. I'm sure Chief Cawley is going to tell us about that. And so if they don't understand and recognize and acknowledge and have a way to deal with the kind of stress that they're under, not only does it roll out to the department, it rolls to home. And that's another part of what I've been doing for 40 years, is to see that this job does not damage people's families and that the families don't damage the job, because it works in both directions.
Thank you for that. And I wholeheartedly agree. Oftentimes we don't talk about what happens at home and how we bring that home. Chief Cawley, from your experience, how does dysregulation show up, right? And I know you've been doing this for a very long time, but how does it show up operationally? When we talk about decision speed, discipline, any of those things, how does that show up?
Well, I think that it can show up in a negative way if we, if we don't slow down and be thoughtful about our decisions and ensure that we're regulating ourselves. One of the things that we value here, that we focus on, is emotional intelligence. In fact, we're putting the final touches on our internal leadership institute here at Castle Rock, and one of the criteria to enter the Leadership Institute and to participate in it is to actually take a emotional intelligence assessment, because that's how important it is to us. And when it comes to emotional control and being self-aware of your emotions and how it affects others. So it is extremely important. And if we're not doing that, then what ends up happening is that leaders can increase the stress of those individuals that they're supposed to be leading and taking care of. And we certainly don't want that to happen. So from my perspective, it's extremely important to ensure that we're conscious of that, and it's something that we're intentional about.
And I'll tell you, that is something, even in this conversation, is fairly new. And I always count on you being ahead of the curve for most of it. But it's interesting how we're still not wanting to have that conversation. Dr. Kirschman, I want to go back to you. From your clinical lens, why do capable leaders sometimes lose the skills that we're talking about, right? So the ability to self-regulate. Chief talked about emotional intelligence. And we know that they have, as you mentioned, so many folks to answer to. What happens when they can't access that?
Well, I've worked with any number of chiefs. One department, I think I was there through 5 different chiefs. So I've had an opportunity to see how people are different. And the answer to your question would be different for every chief. Some chiefs that I've worked with were resume builders. It was never their intention to stay very long. So they weren't very interested in the people that they were, the people who they were supposed to be leading. Others were not prepared for the job in the first place. They were prematurely promoted. I think they had talent. They certainly had intention and dedication, but they just did not have, I'm thinking of one in particular, had really poor ability to communicate with people and to didn't have the kind of persona that people want in a chief. I tell chiefs all the time, you may not know all the people who work for you, particularly in a large agency. Every single one of them has a relationship with you in their heads. So you have to, come across with a persona of interest, kindness, confidence, and so forth. So that one chief really didn't have those kind of skills. I think they were prematurely promoted. I can only say I think it's different for everybody depending upon their circumstances, their agency, their training, like it is just for cops.
Thank you for that. And I certainly remember working for all of those that you just described. And you can see it. I mean, when you are trying to get things done or if you're trying to ask questions, the struggles and then the successes of those. Jack, I definitely, and you guys are going to hear me go between Jack and Chief. This is because we're friends, so no disrespect meant. So as phones start ringing and texts start coming through, but could you just add to that, right? Because again, the doctor is spot on. We've seen all flavors of chiefs, and we've had good ones that we loved working for until they announce their retirement, and then the dread comes back. Can you speak to that a little bit? Not that you're dreadful, so I just want to make sure I say that as well.
I think that from a leadership perspective and from a chief's perspective, a lot has changed. I've seen a lot of change in my 4 decades in this job. And we were just talking the other day with our team about how when I started in policing, the chiefs of police were from the Greatest Generation, and they were called the Greatest Generation for a reason, and they did great things. But they learned their leadership style from the military, which at that time hadn't come as far as they are today. And then those Greatest Generation chiefs then taught what I call the older baby boomer chiefs, who then taught the younger baby boomer chiefs, which I put myself in there. And if we don't break the cycle, then in 10 years from now, we're going to be talking about the same challenges from a leadership perspective and from a chief perspective. So I think that one of the things that we're trying to do is help break that cycle for our profession, and model how important it is to be people-centric, and how important culture is to the organization and to the communities and to the people that we serve.
So this conversation just brought back a memory of a workshop I did for a group of chiefs, all from different departments. And I think we were talking about field training and how to make it more people-centric. And when I asked these chiefs to think back to their early days on the job and what made their training successful, what was hard for them, what were the challenges, what were the hindrances, I have to tell you that to a person, we had tears. And if you don't remember, I think that's really important for the chiefs to stay in touch with their own history, and not to forget what it's like to be new on this job. And as the job is, as the chief said, it's changing all the time, almost every day. But to not lose your own institutional and memory, because you don't get to show, as the chief, you don't get to show your vulnerability. Many chiefs do not avail themselves of mental health services because they think they shouldn't. They're the leader of the organization, and their idea of what that means is to be, as the chief described, some kind of invulnerable military guy or woman. And what we say, to be vulnerable means to be accessible. So we encourage people not to be ashamed of chiefs, not to be ashamed of to getting help and doing so in a public way.
Wow, and thank you for that, right? Because I think when the chief was talking about that importance of being prepared, not just for yourself, but for your teams as well, and the vulnerability, for me, connecting your own lived experience when you were going through the ranks with what officers are doing right now, not only is a grounding piece, but it also should serve for you that things change. And they often change for the better, as opposed to the famous line, well, we've always done it that way, and it worked for me, right? So why wouldn't it work for you? And Chief, this question really is for you, and definitely want to hear from you, Doctor, is regards to how leaders hold those standards of accountability, right? And without relying on threat-based, without relying on force, and how do you make sure that you are doing what you need to do without your boss, chief, without your boss feeling that you're under that particular pressure. Now you're trying to push that down on your teams as well. And when I think about this, and I thought about this question, just as a quick side note, I remember when I was a commander in District 3 and I was getting ready to hand down some discipline on an accident. And the accident was not a bodily damage in a severe way or no one got injured, but we want them to care for the equipment, right? So like it's your own. I used to be told that all the time. That's your car, right? So treat it like it's your car at home and you pay the car payment on it. And I remember the officer was extremely upset because they had a near perfect disciplinary record, right? And they were just beside themselves. And I had to sort of remind them in my own experience, and it wasn't a serious bodily injury accident for me, but I had scraped a pole backing in to a parking spot. And of course, the pole was yellow. The car was white, right? And so you can see the yellow, and the doctor's cracking up. You can see that it was scraped off. So what I did, in my infinite young wisdom, I had the car washed, went through the car wash to see if I could get it off. And when I couldn't, I'm going to tell you how old I am, I used whiteout, right? I went out to the parking lot, shook up the whiteout, and then tried to paint over that thing, right? And then the one thing that people will remember and still experience is before you leave, you have to do a car inspection. That means you walk around that car, you document anything that's not there. And in my case, the sergeant was doing car inspections that day and called me in the office and said, did anything happen? And I'm like, well, sort of maybe, because I was raised that way, don't you dare, right? I'm like, sort of maybe. And, and we go outside, walk around the car, and he swipes his hand and the whiteout comes off. It's like, I'm done. I said, okay, it was me. So, Jack, how do you do that and still connect with people? And because what's important, how people show up in those types of not just disciplinary pieces, but holding people accountable.
Yeah, I think clarity is important from the very beginning, is being clear with the standards that you're trying to set, that you want to set for the organization. And, being people-centric doesn't mean that you don't hold people accountable, but how you do it, that's a whole different thing. So, I can remember, making mistakes in my younger days as an officer and certainly being held accountable. But if you can do that with compassion, and you can do that with how you're speaking with the individual and say, you know what, we all make mistakes. However, it's risen to the level where we need to take corrective action. And, this isn't, these are the conversations that we would have. And we're not holding this against you. Don't want to look in a rearview mirror, but this is where we are today. So we're just asking going forward, please pay more attention to whatever it is that we're talking about, versus, calling somebody in on the carpet and yelling and, and using that, your rank and ego. You don't need to do that. You're simply delivering a message, and you're just being honest, having an honest conversation that can be calm and it can be compassionate, but you still are going to hold the individual accountable.
Yeah, and thank you for that. And I also want to say it's not just using your rank in this fear-based pieces, right? It's also threatening a position, right? So if you're a detective and you have an appointed position, or you're in a unit where you love, oftentimes that is what I would say a carrot that's used, or something used to try to get your attention, which for me is even equally stressful. Dr. Kirschman,
I'd love to add to that.
Please do. Go ahead.
Okay. I mean, you just unloosed a giant soapbox I have here.
Good.
Negativity just runs rampant in law enforcement. And that I think that systemically what you're talking about is also a system problem. When I watch, and I'm very interested in field training and how we take a civilian and turn them into a police officer. And I watched frequently that there's so much negativity and always looking for what's wrong, giving somebody a daily observation report in which there are 17 things this person did wrong and 2 they did right. In the way that we give people the hash marks for what they did and what they didn't do, it's all in the sort of negative realm. I mean, how do you reward people for doing something that may not be visible? I mean, they may be, if they have a beat, and they're keeping things down and no crime, how do you reward them for that? Because you can't prove it. So that constantly looking for what's wrong, the catastrophic thinking, which definitely starts to neurologically change your brain. If you are always looking for what's wrong, what's going to kill me, who's bad, not who's good, all of that constant and repeated and rewarded attitude of looking for the negativity, I think, is also what leads to the kind of discipline that breaks people down, and that does not. I would like us to apply more behavioral science principles to how people learn. I mean, every mistake is I hope I'm not sounding like a hot tub Californian, which I sort of am, but every mistake is an opportunity to learn, and not that you're a piece of crap, but to learn that you're human and you made a mistake and perhaps you didn't have the information that you needed. Now, are there bad cops? Of course there are. Are there people that need to be watched all the time? Yes, that's another subject.
Yeah, absolutely.
Can I respond? I'd like to respond to that
Jack,
real quick.
Go right ahead.
I totally agree with you. And when you think about it, and putting yourself, in the position of that new recruit who's trying to learn, and somebody is hypercritical of you every single day. They're watching you, over your shoulder, and everyone learns differently, right? So we need to recognize that we're dealing with human beings who are trying to learn a very difficult job, and our goal as field training officers should be to find a way to success, not to find everything that they did wrong. Now, obviously, you have to have learning moments, but I think back and early on in my career and talking with other officers and other agencies, how do we treat new recruits and police officers when they first come on the job in police departments? Because the experiences that we as individuals experience when we come into an organization, that helps form us as we move through our careers. And I think this whole culture of hazing and treating individuals that are new in the policing profession, because that's how we were treated, that has to stop. We have to start treating people like the valued humans that they are, because we're going to have more success with them down the road. And I think that's one of the issues that we need to work on as a profession. And one of the examples that I like to use is, if you think about how tech companies treat their new software engineers, they're valued. They're treated like gold. Well, why don't we do that with our new police officers? Because we should treat them at least as well as we do a software engineer.
Absolutely. And I'm going to join the soapbox in saying, Dr. Kirschman, you talked about the FTO program. I'm going to point to the academy, because the academy for me is where it all begins, right? So how you not only see yourself, but how you see the community. And we know that there's various sort of curriculum for each academy, each state, each county. Some have post-peace officer standards training and some don't. But I'm going to point to the academy as a place where all of that starts, including, the psychological fear of death. I mean, not that, of course, people have not given the ultimate sacrifice, but those of us who've been doing this for a while know that every day is not like that. And so there is a lot of work, I would say, to be done in the academy setting as well in regards to regulating and how do we have these conversations. And back to you, Chief, when you're in academy and it's run like a boot camp, right? We've had these conversations for decades about what that means and what that looks like and the product you get from that as well. So I think those are always equally important. I want to go to a question that is really good for both of you. Can you just talk about, and Chief, because you're putting a program in place, but why do leaders fail to prepare their folks? And I would say not just that, why is it that the self-regulation portion is not deemed as important as firearms and defensive driving? So open to either one.
Well, why isn't it? It's probably why have we, why did we have the leadership failures that we've had, over the years? And I think it's because we've paid attention to, obviously the things that are, that operationally, firearms, driving, arrest tactics, and those types of things. But we haven't been intentional about culture or self-regulation or mental health for officers until just recently, really. So I think we're evolving as a profession. We hadn't done that in the time that I've been in this profession. We're just now getting there on some of these things, and it's important, but a lot of damage has been done before that because we weren't paying attention to it. I think it's because we have limited time and resources, and we know we have to do these things to keep the officers safe out in the field. But when it comes to how they regulate and their mental health, until just recently, we really haven't paid attention to it and been intentional about it.
Wonderful. Dr. Kirschman, do you know if you want to add it?
Yeah, I do. Many police officers are athletic people. And they come from an athletic background and they continue in athletics. And we have to teach them self-care and responsibility for taking care of themselves. Now, I wouldn't use the term self-care because that has different images for people, candles and bubble bath and stuff like that. And that very often when I see officers who are injured, they are really angry at their departments. We know the workers' comp system is probably has become the awful thing it was designed to avoid. And they will say, they'll say, I'm not going to pay to go see a psychiatrist or whatever medical person they need. I'm going to make the department pay because they did it to me. That kind of attitude. So I really think that we have to start from the beginning to say that, look, we'll help you out, but you are responsible for yourself. You're adults. And you're responsible for your own self-care. You're responsible for caring for your families. You're responsible for making sure this job does not contaminate the rest of your life. And then the organization systemically has to stop asking cops to dedicate themselves to their jobs first and foremost. That if you stay home with a sick child, then your loyalty is split. That should not be a requirement of the job, but it is there. And I hesitate to mention this, but I will anyhow. The kind of masculine, super macho subculture that's built up for men and women in law enforcement is often what makes people ashamed of needing any sort of help, whether it's mental health or physical help or eyeglasses. It seems to be across the board. So I think we got to tackle that. In the academy, 2 hours of stress management doesn't cut it. And it's too early because the people in the academy or in the field training program are sitting back, listening to the veteran officers who are talking about their own experiences. They've got their arms crossed and they're saying, this will never happen to me. Because they don't have enough road wear. They haven't been exposed enough to see what could happen to you, even if it isn't your own physical self that's in danger, but just what you're exposed to in the worst of humanity. They don't get that's something they have to take care of themselves about. And I think we got a hammer.
100%.
Sorry.
No, you're, again, and on that note, we are out of time, but I want to promise from both of you that you will come back and let's continue the conversation because I think this is equally not just important about, as you mentioned, Dr. Kirschman, about having the skills to take care of yourself, right? For me, and leaders try to command calm, right? You can't do that if you're always in protection mode, right? In self-survival, you cannot do that. And so we see those frustrations have that. So before you correct and before you discipline or decide, notice the state. I always say, notice the state you're leading from. So on that note, Chief Cawley, Jack, thank you so much. Dr. Kirschman, thank you so much for your time. And I will promise you will be back because this is critical conversation. So again, thank you for joining us today on Just Breathe.
Thank you, Tracie.
Thanks.
Thanks for what you're doing.
Thank you. Appreciate you.